And our next speaker is Jouni-Matti Kuukkanen from University of Oulu. And his title is, oh, I don't need this now, Methodologism and Functionalism as Progressive Philosophies.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to talk about some of my recent ideas in research. Indeed, the title is now there, and this is also a book talk about pragmatism, but probably in a quite different sense. So I've just finished the book. It's now in production, and the first part of this talk will. Wait a second. Now, there. That's the contents. First part of this talk will be outlining this very idea of methodologism. I'm trying to explain what's the idea, why I have chosen this very term, and it's also a reason to come to this conference, because it was a method and conference, convergence conference. Then the second part of the talk is more like applying something that I see very compatible with this. My approach is neo-pragmatist and methodologist approaches about the functionalist theory of meaning. Very, very briefly, I don't have much time. A little bit Sellars' functionalism, then functions about truth, mainly through Huw Price's most recent publications. And then if I have time, I'll try to see how this would be applied also to the very notion of proposition itself. And a few words about the progress, but that's very, very, very thin. Okay, so that's the name of the book, Doing, Knowing, and Getting It Right, Methodologism as Pragmatism. It's in production and should come out in 2026 in early months by Cambridge University Press. So I wanted to show this slide in order to locate myself on the philosophical field. Those are the most important authors, not all of them, but maybe the most important on the left upper corner, Sellars. Sellars is important, then moving on to Brandom. Roth is there in the background, and of course, Wittgenstein and Huw Price was becoming more prominent later today. Gilbert Ryle, Peregrine's book is very good too, and several others. So that's give you a quick idea where this talk is coming from. And then I chose this tactic of giving a key quotation in the beginning of each chapter, which should capture the essence of the chapter. And these two I've chosen for this talk. And the first one from Dewey: the value of any cognitive conclusion depends upon the method by which it's reached. And the second one from Sellars: meaning statements do not talk about relation between words and entities. They classify words within language with respect to our own base language. So, roughly, I could stop here. If you get these two sentences, then my talk is there, encapsulated. But I'll keep talking a little bit further, nevertheless. Some more outlining. So, what is neo-pragmatism? This is my take on it, and that basically refers to Sellars, Brandom, Rowley, perhaps, Huw Price. I count myself also in this group. So it's prioritizing doing over thinking, practice over theory, and action over contemplation. And furthermore, pragmatics over semantics, natural epistemology over metaphysics, knowing how over knowing that. There's a chapter or two of that in the book. Doing, use, and pragmatic significance are the fundamental aspects of explaining meaning and knowing. So indeed, one way to say is to try to take this neo-pragmatist approach to its logical end. So it's a doing, practice that matters. Of course, not any kind of doing, but it must be correct doing when we get to meaningful expressions and when we get to knowledge. The key issue is then what kind of knowing, what regulates this practice that produces both knowledge and meanings. One way to approach is that if I put forward any assertion A, and the question now for us is to decide whether to accept this, my assertion, whether it's correct, whether it's incorrect, or whether indeed reject it. if one is a representationalist, there is an answer entailed. It's correct if it represents the external state of affairs as they are independently of the speakers. Now, let's suppose this option is not available. And I don't have much time to talk about why it's not available, but I'm anti-representationalist together with Brandom, Price, and some others. We need to find more direct way to accept the correctness, incorrectness, the normativity itself. And the claim here is that methodologism as pragmatism provides an answer without representationalism, and the answer, whether to accept or reject, lies in the specific kind of practice. That's the key. So why it would not be available? I'm not saying that anti-representation is just plain sailing, but representationalism is neither. So I won't go into this, so I just invite you to maybe read book at some point. But there are several problems I listed: placement problem, non-factualism of language, myth of the given, meaning is not but relational coming from Sellars, and the Wittgensteinian issue, no universal grammar for ordinary language. So at least as a global theory, it doesn't seem to be working. And yet another way to explain the very idea of methodologism is this quotation from Brandom. Brandom doesn't use the words that I use, and I actually think he doesn't go far enough in some respects. But nevertheless, we can read this quotation and that the idea of methodologism is entailed here. Okay, I read it. It's useful to approach a sort of understanding that is involved in mastering a practice. For instance, a practice of applying or assessing an application of a rule, by means of Ryle's distinction between knowing how and knowing that. Knowing how to do something is a matter of practical ability. To know how is just to be reliably able. Thus one knows how to ride a bicycle, apply a concept, draw an inference, and so on, just in case one can discriminate in one's practice. In the performances one produces and assesses between correct and incorrect ways of doing these things. So the elements are here. Knowing how, in my conception, and here too, is the master concept of knowing, which subsumes both non-linguistic and linguistic practices. So linguistic practice is a discursive practice. And that's, of course, because we're talking about incorrect and correct normativity, it's governed by certain rules, which then determine correct and incorrect ways of doing. It's also possible to explain it this way. If you take the genus knowing how, we can split it into linguistic and non-linguistic. And of course, we can get correct inferences by rules, incorrect, incomprehensible, insupportable, and so on, and correct inferences if they're properly rule-bound. And that's the correct way to acquire a claim that is warranted. And also it applies to non-linguistic things. Obviously we can do things, but we can do it badly or incorrectly. Playing chess, let's think about playing chess. That's a non-linguistic activity which we can do correctly or incorrectly, and the rules dictate it. So why did I then chose this idea of methodologism? So this is my note to the classical pragmatism. Of course, there's the etymological meaning of method. It's a way of inquiry, doing in some way, and the idea that the warrant for a belief comes through with correct rule-bound generation, the process itself. Peirce talked about methods. He distinguished 4 different kinds of methods. I use it more generally. I think methods are the ways of doing. In any case, if we want to have a goal for our practices and methods, ways of doing, then I would endorse the Peirce's idea to settle the beliefs, to fix the beliefs in the end. So that's the goal, or at least keep rational conversation going on. Dewey also talk about enduring, stable beliefs, and indeed the quotation you already saw, value of any cognitive conclusion depends upon method by which it's reached. Okay, to note, of course, there are proper methods, but there are also proper application of these methods. So there's a method to do research of history, archival method, reasoning, perhaps narrative writing. So you should do those in order to have your warranted results. but of course you can apply them correctly or incorrectly. You can do archival method, but do it badly or reason badly. So there's those two aspects. So that's the now the outline, and I'm now talking about sort of an application. I go to the functionalism. So that's the where actually the whole work started with Sellars' theory of meaning, functional theory of meaning, which can be classified as a one kind of use theory of meaning, and you have, of course, many great predecessors listed there, some of them. So perhaps the key idea is then expressed in the quotation by Brandom and Sharp. The sentence, as in language L means P, says that S plays the same or perhaps relevantly similar role in L as the sentence that replaces P plays in its language. So indeed, we are trying to find how the word is used, how the expression is used. What's its role? Sellars talks about playing the same role, serving the same function, performing the same office, doing the same job. And then actually here I could illustrate by way of Jaroslav Peregrin's example. We could illustrate the functional inferential role by way of conjunction. So what's the meaning of conjunction? Obviously, it's not a representational thing. It's how it's used. So how it's used. So perhaps the complete definition of the meaning of conjunction is summarized by these three rules. So those determine the use. And now this principle is then extended to covering all expressions in also natural language. Things are not as clear, as simple, but basically it's the role, it's a functional role, how it's used, that we are interested in. The interesting thing in Sellars is then that he's a nominalist. He's a genuine nominalist, and he thinks even the grammatical commitment to abstract entities is misleading. He states statements about linguistic roles are reducible to statements involving no abstract singular terms that stand for abstract entities. So he formulates its own kind of language, also own kind of notation, dot notation, where he tells about the roles and similarity of the roles. So mean stands for refers are metalinguistic expressions for classifying the expressions of an object language according to their functional role. Okay, translation is possible when the roles are similar, same or similar enough, they can map them. And even an example of something like triangularity, commit speaker to the only tokens, linguistic items, and token expressions. So we understand the language is indeed like a chess, it's like moving pieces and playing this discursive game guided by specific rules. So it's particular, it's natural, and he wanted to avoid Platonistic anxieties. So how would this apply? If we take to some philosophical notions, and this is my very brief words about truth and then proposition. So I start with this Ramsey's idea, who is of course has been called Cambridge pragmatist. So is truth some kind of substantial property? We already heard today a lot about truth, but very little more today. So Frank Ramsey was a deflationarist, and he writes, it's true that Caesar was murdered means no more than that Caesar was murdered. It's false that Caesar was murdered means that Caesar was not murdered. So whenever we put the proposition function P is true, it simply means that P, it means stating the very same sentence. Caesar was murdered is true, means Caesar was murdered. I think in Ramsey's conception, so far as I know, it led to the redundancy theory, that truth doesn't really have any essential function in natural language, so even we could do away with it. Though I think very few have followed this, and even the deflationary theorists find some function, but then talk about linguistic predicate. So what function this linguistic predicate truth would have? And here I found the Huw Price's ideas interesting, his expressivism. His expressivism is roughly the idea that the accounts for the existence and practical relevance of the vocabularies in question typically former in the terms of latter. So when we have these terms, we ask, why do we have this? What change it would make if we didn't have them? What's the relation to practical life? What's the function, in other words, of these very terms? And this is different from a metaphysical approach who usually talks about the nature and reality and type of questions. So Huw thinks truth has a role in language, and it will be defined by its use conditions, how things would be different if we didn't have it. In essence, this is his idea. Truth functions as a normative device. It puts pressure for coordination. And instead of having what he calls roll call, which just listed subjective opinions, we have to engage in a critical dialogue and ask who's correct, who's incorrect in this case. And in a genuine dispute, the point is to put pressure for showing your reasons, showing a justification for what you claim, whose claim is warranted in the end. And the name of the game is to seek approval of others and avoid the situation where others disapprove. Ideally, a better justified claim would prevail. And of course, the entailment here again is that they are playing the same type of game. The rules of the game must be the same. And here, I think it nicely works, this Brandomian idea that we are playing this game of giving and asking for reasons. Huw then, a very recent paper, it seems that it hasn't actually published yet, but he's actually expanding this view and sees three functions ticking the box, indicating preference monologically, saying D to me to same here, dialogical performative agreement to someone, and then the third one that we just saw that it's a normative device, encouraging alignment of opinions expressed. I think I'm getting to the end almost. So this is just a thought. If we apply the functionalist approach, functionalist theory of meaning to the propositions, so other propositions, it's typically thought that's somehow evident, but is it? Is it evident? Well, we can ask if the reality is so obvious. I mean, anyway, they are non-natural, non-observational, depending on theory a little bit, but in this Frege sense, and a historic real of them own. And just this short quotation, if you go to the history of philosophy, there's a claim that, it's not easy to find assertions towards the reality of propositions. So it hasn't been always so clear. So why do we propose them? Why do we think there are propositions, such non-natural entities? And just a brief glance, and this is just an idea. If you look at the reasons listed there, we assume that propositions because they are needed to perform various tasks. So that's in effect a functional explanation. Am I out of time? Or?
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, you can just see that those are very typical, and in Stanford wherever you find. So that's a functional explanation, and the big idea here is if you are able to explain these functions by way of some other entities, some natural entities, that would be preferable, I claim. And for example, if you take the Sellarsian idea, actually commits to the linguistic entities mainly, we can explain meaning of sentences by finding the roles, how they're used. Also, the same works with translations. And so perhaps we can continue. I don't have a theory to provide, but actually it seems to be there in the cards, this possibility. So it's the functions of the propositions that are essential, not that they are anything as such, ontologically speaking. And sort of my question is really whether we call them propositions or not is immaterial, whether they are there insofar as we can satisfy the functions. So can functions be explained by natural entities? Of course, the others, quantum and so on, will have thought in similar fashion. So why is this progress? In 2 words, very thinly. Quotation by Quine. This is consistent with the scientific world. We're looking for clarification of our conceptual schemes, simpler, clearer expressions, and Huw Price's suggestion, being replace methodological questions with questions about human thought and language. So at least we are on a firmer ground. What we are talking about, we are talking about use of language rather than some otherworldly entities. And this this is what pragmatism, including functionalism, methodologism strive for. And I think this would be a progressive step. We understand better what these very difficult abstract notions are. Thank you.
5 minutes for discussion. Please, Nora, please. I'm sorry I have to point at you. It's very impolite, but anyway, please.
Thank you. I don't mind at all. I found this really interesting because I've been working on inactivism and representationalism and their relationship. I do understand that you're talking about language largely, but I would still like to go back to one of the earlier slides and ask you, why do you think that inferences are linguistic?
Earlier slides?
Yeah, that one.
That one.
Yeah.
Why inferences are linguistic?
Yeah.
I think it's moving from one sentence to another. In that sense, it's discursive practice.
I mean, why can't we have intuitive inferences? Why can't perception be inferential?
Why can't perception be inferential?
Yeah.
Probably you're right. Well, that's a good question, because I think Sellars writes quite a lot about that at some point in the. I think perception can be regarded as non-inferential, but I think if you take his lesson from the myth of the given, then whenever we, let's say it's a sensation of red, whenever we give it a tag, name tag, the concept, then we are playing inferential game. So if this is red, X is red, it clearly entitles you to draw some inferences and forbids to draw some other inferences. So it becomes conceptual. Inference don't matter. The impulse itself probably can be non-inference.
I'd like to push back on that, but do we have to go on? Yeah.
Thank you. Very, very clarifying. Just a question about the pragmatist tradition within which this, in a way, belongs, because in some ways it might seem that this methodologism has something to do with with what the early pragmatists called the pragmatic method, right? Like Peirce and James. But then I have been wondering whether there is some tension within the tradition regarding this issue of nominalism, because when you bring Sellars into this very strongly, and of course the nominalism is strong there, that could be in some sort of tension with the original Peircean idea that pragmatism cannot really be nominalistic. According to Peirce, nominalism was like the worst philosophical sin you can commit, right? So of course that is not an objection to the project. I mean, this is enormously interesting and brings pragmatism forward in many ways. But I'm just wondering if you ever get this kind of criticism that if somebody like looks at this from a Peircean perspective, then there could be issues with nominalism there.
Yes, thank you. Good point. I can't reject that. I mean, obviously, my inspiration and the starting point has been the neo-pragmatism, and then taking some broader framework or inspiration also from Peirce point of view, but I don't really work on them, so I can't claim expertise on them. And then, of course, there is an approach of pragmatism. There's a classical, there's a neo, but even within the neo-pragmatism, it's not entirely happy family. At least there are differences in emphasis. Huw Price, for example, thinks that, and I agree with him, Brandom is not anti-representationalist enough. He sort of he fails and he brings it through the back door. So there are different points. But yes, but I so that it's not Peircean or pragmatist, then I don't regard it as a argument against this. But yeah, they did not in all respects pragmatist.
Okay, yeah.
I was just sitting aside. He didn't notice. I was the first one.
Yes.
So when I saw your neo-pragmatism, I thought, well, I am a neo-pragmatist proof theorist. Proof theory sort of fits perfectly.
Yes.
But you just treat one aspect. So
Okay.
you look at the way of justifying assertions. That's one thing. But the other point that is completely missing from the picture is what you are committed to when you make an assertion. And now the principle is this, and I'll end with this. Anything that follows from the immediate grounds for asserting a proposition must follow from that proposition. With this thing, you will square the second half of what this thing has to do with proof theory.
Right. So we leave it as a comment. I mean, I don't know enough about proof theory, but it's, I don't know what you are saying that it's compatible with the proof theory or it's not.
No, it's what you said. This was like a proof theorist's thinking described in very, very general terms. In this,
Okay.
Neo-pragmatism.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to